Okay, actually, we're going to start with our first presenter, and then once he is done, the economic development panel members, please come up. Well, I'll come up and call you to the front table. So our first speaker on economic development, that's the first panel of the day, is David Robinson, Chair of the Economics Department at Laurentian University. For those in the north, you've probably heard him on CBC Radio or read his column in Northern Ontario Business. He likes to be provocative, and maybe he'll be provocative this morning, I'm not sure. David Robinson.
Thank you very much. You know why you start meetings like this with economists? Because it's all uphill after that. When I was young, I used to go to meetings, and I was always impressed that the only part I could remember was The Economist. And then I realized a few years later it was because I'd slept through the rest after that. I just have a few minutes to give you the vast overview of the economic development issues, and I have a little bit to show you. As you know, PowerPoint is now thought to rot your mind, so this is my one PowerPoint slide. And it tells you why we're interested in immigration here in North Bay and Sudbury. If you look at the past, up until 1961, North Bay's population grew pretty steadily. There was this amazing jump between the 1961 census and 1971 census, and then growth really flattened out. So for almost, well, 40 years, if you calculate the growth rate, it was 0.25% in population for the city of North Bay. So you can see why people in North Bay and we in Sudbury are very interested in immigration. And I keep projecting significant gains because of the world economic situation at the end of that, but since the 2011 census isn't in yet, I can't say that according to this graph. I've got a fellow from Oklahoma, Rob, here, who's going to try to navigate through the slides that I like to use for this. So could you try and switch this, Rob? Isn't that exciting? I use a piece of software. It's a mind mapping software. Could you shrink everything for me? And I like this for a number of reasons. But it's much better when I'm doing the controlling, because I've got poor Rob has had to learn to do this. This is good. It's supposed to disappear. One of the things I like about this is just showing the logical structure of what I'm doing. So we want to talk about the situation for a start. Could you click on that? I mentioned the growth, that it's slowed, and we're not happy about that. There are some new theories about economic development that might bear on this, and of course there are a number of new public programs, like the concentration on integrating immigrants more systematically than we have before. That's essentially where we are when we start this. So could you close situation for me, Rob, and let's go on to the new theories. This is the only part I know anything about. Start with the old theory, Rob. The old theory basically was based on Keynesian multiplier theory. And the logic of this theory was that you just add capital. You get investors, you attract investors to your community. The investors build a plant or start a business. That attracts people. Can we just see what's off to the right there? See these people? The logic of the old theory was that people generally stayed in one place, and capital moved fairly easily. So you went out and you tried to tempt capital to come to your community. That led to tax competitions between communities, so we'll reduce our land taxes. You don't have to pay any property taxes for 10 years. We'll pay for you for the development and so on. And communities tend not to get quite as much benefit from attracting capital when they have to bribe it to come. So let's go back to the next couple of points. This is sometimes called there's nothing more on any of these, Rob, so you can just read. These are called base multiplier models. And in fact, I've been teaching this in my introduction to regional economics. My students helped me construct this talk for you. Base multiplier models are the standard model that most economic development offices follow. The idea is you've got to find some new jobs where you'll be exporting something from outside the region so money comes in so you can pay people. You can use the same trick if you can do some import substitution. That increases the multiplier, but it's still the same economic model. So I've now covered what's essentially 50 years of economic development here. Close that one up. We don't think about that anymore. Could I have the new theory, Rob? The new theory starts with a bunch of nice jargon like creative economy, skills, creativity, knowledge, social capital. When I do this in my course, of course, it's 8 separate theories, but they're really all the same thing. They all amount to, you've heard these, and I treat them as 8 different theories, but in fact they're all about adding human capital, human skills. So in the new theory, you're not setting out to attract capital investors. What you're trying to do is attract the people who've invested in their own abilities. Why do you do that? Did we have a why? Because the kind of capital that is most productive in a modern economy is the capital that is embedded in people. It's their skills and their abilities. And in the new theory, money capital follows the people. So you get investment where you have talent. It's a quite different view. We're having a little trouble getting used to what this means, and we don't really know how to promote it very well. Part of this conference is about how you attract that human talent. So who are you trying to attack? I'm not trying to say attack. You're trying to attract immigrants from other areas who have the skills you want. There are 4 categories you might be interested in. People from other countries. This is more or less the conventional view of immigration. One of the real attractions of attracting immigrants from other countries is they've probably been educated somewhere else, so someone else has paid for the huge investment in human capital. So we'll steal talented doctors from Africa, for example. We do that. On the other hand, because of our immigration policy, people who do immigrate often bring family members. Reuniting families means that you take on pension and medical costs from the tail end of the life. It may balance out. I've never seen a really good study of how those issues balance out. Immigrants aren't all the same, and they aren't all equally appropriate to a particular community like North Bay. And you will hear, and probably have heard, that Northern Ontario is not Toronto. Immigrants are interested in moving to places with jobs, and places like Toronto are generally more attractive, has been our experience, than smaller communities in Canada. One of the reasons, though, is not because North Bay isn't attractive, it's because North Bay hasn't had the economic growth. At 0.25% growth, you're not attracting anybody, you're sending people out. North Bay has been a source of immigration for other regions. Could I have the next one? From other regions, I'm not saying anything particular about that, but let's consider the third one down, Rob. No, that's the children, thank you. Children, good. We don't generally think of children as immigrants, but of course, they aren't really people when they start, are they? They aren't members of society. They certainly aren't members of your economy, your productive economy. You actually have to do a whole bunch of bagging them into shape and adding human capital to them before they become members of your economy, productive members. So children are actually the standard source of labor, immigrant labor, if you want to think of it that way. And when you're thinking about immigrants, you can't really think about it without figuring out what it is that's keeping your kids there. Because if you can't keep your kids there, you're not going to keep new people from other parts of the world there, are you? This should be considered as part of the same strategy. I'd add, can we back up and pick up the last one, Rob? In Northern Ontario, we have a tremendous pool of First Nations people who've been largely excluded from our productive economy, not entirely. To some extent, it's a different culture as well. More importantly, it's an excluded population in which the human capital often hasn't been developed adequately, and we have that opportunity far more than they have in Toronto. So we have a number of sources of immigrants that we need to consider. Okay, go to the next point, Marla. These categories, immigrants from other regions, children, and people of First Nations here, in practical sense, in terms of the economic development, are the same. You may think of them as very different, but they're, from the point of view of economic development, the same. So close all that line up. Let's back away from the theory. After all, they've only given me 8 minutes to cover all of this. Close up you. And do I have any advice? Well, the economists always have advice. What is it that people come to? Well, they come for quality of place, for one thing. Richard Florida has been talking about this. The gay index is, of course, one key measure that people are talking about right now, quality of place. If you can get more gays, obviously more people will come. I'm making fun of Richard Florida. I see him as a competitor. They come, the research shows, for topography. If you have lots of hills, and especially if you have mountains with snow on top, people will move there. Can you manage that? I'd suggest get a contract for the garbage from Toronto and build a mountain. You've got some hills to start with, build it on top of the block. Then you have a great ski hill and you'll be able to attract more immigrants. They come for climate. As you know, we in Northern Ontario just pretend that the months of the year don't exist. It is an issue though. They come for shoreline. Oddly enough, if you look at the patterns of migration in the States, people go to places where there are beaches and lakes. So you're well off here in North Bay. I think market the shoreline. Find some inland country, tell them you've got a beach. Don't tell them about the climate. They come for culture. North Bay is known for being one of the more civilized cities in Northern Ontario. It's good news. People with families come for good schools. A lot of migration in the States is for the sake of schools. That takes you back to the question of children. If you want to develop an economy, make sure you have the best schools in the region. I know you're not allowed to do anything in your schools because we've got a centralized system. A centralized, essentially, I would say, colonial education system that imposes the metropolitan model on every town in Northern Ontario. I think you need, if you want to attract immigrants, part of your strategy is getting control of your own school system, frankly. Now, educational institutions, one of the key ways of attracting immigrants actually turns out to be through the post-secondary education system. People come to universities, you have a university, you have a college, and it's worth saying that these are highly desirable immigrants as a rule, whether they come from Toronto or even Alberta or Asia, Africa. These are generally talented people. And one of the things that happens for them is they get 5 points automatically as potential immigrants in the rating, simply for doing 2 years of education here. Okay, so you want an immigration strategy, you might want to concentrate on witnessing. The other thing is people come for and stay for jobs. And if you wanted a really simple strategy, it might be noticing that if someone has an offer of a job, they get another 10 to 15 points in immigration rating on the score. So that gives you 15 to 20 points if you get a visa student into Nipissing and then bring them into some of the businesses in Sudbury or in North Bay and get them a job offer. People who have jobs are likely to stay. That's a pretty simple and sneaky use of the system, and that's the best I can do for now. And I think I'm running out of time. All right. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, David. I invite you to stay up here and join the panel, and you may have some more thoughts as we get questions from the audience. So if I could invite the panelists up to the front, Art Lawson, Varla Tremblay, Linda Manning, and Carmen Demarco. Okay, each of the panelists has 5 minutes, and after that we'll try and get some discussion going, and after that you will have a chance to interact with the panelists as well. So the first panelist is Art Lawson, Manager, Community Economic Development Unit, Ontario Ministry of Agricultural, Food and Rural Affairs.
Thanks very much, Don. I don't know if the slides are handy or not. It's really not very much time in any event, but just as a bit of background, I'm with in the Economic Development Division at the Ministry. The group that I manage develops tools and resources primarily for rural communities. In Southern Ontario, some of the local facilitation of the use of the tools is through our regional staff. In Northern Ontario, it's through Northern Development Mines and Forestry, so we have a relationship with them to help them understand the resources that we have. So, just very quickly, maybe move on to the next slide. So just to talk a little bit about understanding where human capital comes from. So I think in the back of your mind is understanding this big equation of where do people come from. So it's, you hit it again, it's so the national migration, international, and the local situation. So anyway, okay, drive on. We don't have a whole lot of time here. So my group develops tools, the very sort of the underlying things, some economic analysis tools. We own a lot of data. And historically, if you looked at the competitiveness of communities in terms of their economic viability, one of the things was looking at sectors. And so sectors with a high location quotient, that means that the concentration of businesses within a certain sector was above the average of, say, the reference population. And in our case, we used Ontario as a reference population. So if you had a concentration, say, in mining that's greater than 1, it means you're a greater concentration of that sector compared with the province. So we're in the process of redeveloping these tools, and we're going 2 different directions. One is looking at occupation codes, rather than just looking at sector codes like NAICS codes. We're looking at NOx codes, so it's code by occupation. And we've done a couple of different things. One is using Florida's work to classify them by their creative classifications. So there's 500 and some odd occupations and broken into 4 categories. So you can actually look at what do you already have in the community in terms of creative type occupations. And maybe there's things you can be doing to help enhance those. And the other thing is just looking at the, say when you start to understand, well, which sectors are the ones that are helping to drive the local economy, what are the ones with the location quotient above 1, and then start to look at, well, what are some of the jobs within those sectors? And then looking at the occupation codes. Because you'll have high concentrations, and part of the competitiveness of your communities and the attractiveness may relate to the concentration of those career opportunities. And so I think you'll find some different things happening. So we just drive on. I think there's one of the simplest tools. Well, maybe stop at that first one. First impressions community exchange. We've done these exchanges with about 230 communities in Ontario, quite a few in the north, probably more in the south than in the north. But this is just a structured exchange. It goes back to what Dave was saying about the quality of the place. But this is a very simple process. It's like a secret shopper where you have visitation teams of about 6 or 8 from each community. They sign an agreement. It's a good thing to get a council minute because sometimes the report backs will result in things that need to be done. Like maybe they'll say, well, the signage isn't too good. So anyway, this is a structured process that the teams are coached. They're given some questions to help guide them, some training for the team. It's good to be thoughtful that your team represents, you'll have an older person, a younger person, some business people, people looking for homes, people looking for education, and so on, so recreation. So they'll see it from different perspectives. They agree on that the exchange is going to happen. It's not a formal deal. It's all kind of done under cover of darkness. But they'll do it. But it's in say a 2-month window. You'll agree that this change will take place. They also agree to report back to one another and give them the templates for doing the report backs. But these are being immensely popular. People are very interested to hear what other communities think about them. And we'll have small places, like, I don't know, Seaforth, Ontario is about 1,500 people. Petrolia is about the same. And they did an exchange, and they had like 300 people put up at each place to hear what the other community thought. And so, I mean, if you can get that kind of local engagement to hear what other people think, I think that's incredible. And when we've redone some of these toolkits, we've included some questions that relate to human capital, some of the attitudes, or the sort of things, indicators that might be, is this a welcoming community, the kind of service that people get, and that kind of thing. So we'll try on. The next one. One of the outcomes of first impressions is often that you wind up some pretty motivated volunteers, and they'll look for something else to do. And I think Marla mentioned that a lot of the work here in North Bay began with business retention and expansion, a study that was done. But this is really focusing on the businesses that are already here. It's not about bringing new people in. It's about retaining and growing the businesses who are here. And for a lot of small communities, that is the game. So you're probably not going to attract Toyota or Honda to every little community in Northern Ontario. So it's better to worry about the people who are already here, and if you take care of them, they, in fact, what we've seen over time, we've done about 150 of these, a bit more than that, 160 of these projects, and typically what happens is if you take care of your local businesses, they will become ambassadors, so they'll actually help with the attraction of new companies because they feel that they're cared about and that they matter locally. So the next one, downtown revitalization. David mentioned about the importance of place, and certainly in Southern Ontario. I don't know about the North because I've traveled up here lots, but I know more about Southern Ontario. But many of the downtown areas have kind of fallen into sort of less productive and less appealing looking than they used to be. They're no longer serving the purpose they did when they were first built. And there's a high number of them that are looking at redeveloping your downtown. So we have a suite of tools to help communities undertake. They can be a very structured process where it's like a 3-year project, or they can do bits and pieces where they may want to focus on, say, downtown market analysis as a place to begin, but it can be a very comprehensive process. So anyway, that's the general 4 suites of tools that we support. And as I say, I don't know if there's any, I'll see example, I'll talk about this later. But, I think that the main thing is it doesn't matter where you begin. The important thing is just to begin, and that we're happy to help you wherever we can.
Thanks very much, Art. Next up, with the municipal economic development perspective, is Varla Tremblay, Economic Development Officer with City North Bay and co-chair of our North Bay Newcomer Network.
So many of you were here yesterday. I'll try not to be overly repetitive. I'm going to talk a little bit about, actually I'm going to plug some of the OMAFRA programs that were just itemized by Art. We've actually participated in all of the ones that were indicated. As Art mentioned, BRE was kind of the kickoff process why we looked at immigration as a means of increasing the labor market pool and so forth for our companies. But another offset of the BRE program, most of the industrial development or growth that's happened in North Bay over the last few years was because of the BRE program. Directly. You know, we would literally interview our clients, and that's how we knew that they wanted to expand, and that's how we were able to help them access funds from NOHFC or from other sources of government to be able to expand and create new jobs. So it's definitely a good program if your community hasn't participated in it. A couple of other ones, the First Impression Community Exchange Program we participated in several years ago when we did a comparison with Cornwall, so that was very interesting. I was a secret shopper. It was great fun. I went down there, I pretended I was a nursery locating, I was all kinds of things. It was hilarious, and the different types of feedback we got in the community were very interesting as well, and we've actually implemented a few of the things from that program here in North Bay. The signage was an issue, we've revisited our signage, so forth. We've done some downtown community improvement program things to revitalize our downtown. We also participated in a program that Art didn't mention called Zero, which was kind of spearheaded through OMAFRA, where we had an individual working in our community through a bridge program, but it was a Zero. I don't even remember what the acronym stands for, but, and just as an aside, that individual was our first person in our connector program that we created, and he called me the other day, and he did get a job through that connector program, and he was our bridge client. So that was great. So it's coming back to North Bay and somebody that we managed to retain. So that's an aside. Something for another panelist. I love listening to economists, so you shouldn't think that they're boring. I think it's the best part of any conference. I'm a little biased being in economic development, but I still think it's very interesting. Okay, from an economic development perspective, for a municipality, we look at human capital in a different way as well. When we first initiated this process of looking at attracting and retaining immigrants, I mentioned yesterday that we focused on retention as opposed to attraction. That wasn't necessarily, not that it was frowned upon at the city. I had to explain it, to the municipal league, to council and stuff like that, because by rights I'm in economic development. My job is to attract people. And immigration at the time, and I would say still is throughout the country, seen as a social issue. It's not just a social thing. People see it as a social thing. I get many calls from all over the country because they hear about some of the programs we've created and so forth. And a lot of them are from settlement agencies or agencies that provide support services or different organizations in communities that call me and they don't understand how come in North Bay it's the city that has led most of the programs. So how did you get the city to be interested? And what I always tell them, because they tend to focus on the social component of it. And I always tell them, you know what, if you're going to go to your municipality and try and get them to support you, don't pitch it that way. It's not a social issue. Pitch it as an economic issue. Tell them to talk to their companies, and they'll, sell it that way, and you'll have a lot more success getting municipal support. It's unfortunate that that's the way they have to do it, but realistically, it is human capital. So they have to sell it as human capital. It is definitely, obviously, it's an impact to your community, it's great to have diversity and so forth, but that's not necessarily the way to sell it to municipal support. We've actually spun it in the sense that from a company perspective, they have to see it as infrastructure. From a municipal perspective, it's infrastructure. I mean, it's awful to put it that way, but realistically, you need water, you need sewers, you need roads, you need all of that. But if there's nobody living here, you don't need any of it. So, it is, by rights, a piece of our community and our community infrastructure. So that's kind of a perspective that we take at the city. So that's, I don't really want to repeat all the stuff I talked about yesterday, but that's just kind of from a municipal perspective, the way we see the human capital piece. And obviously the impact on our local companies is what pushes us. But it's interesting because 5 years ago we initiated that's how I thought about it. I don't see it that way anymore. It's amazing how the connection, the people part of it, impacts you very, very quickly. And anybody who works with me, I have a number of different sectors in economic development. This is just one of many. I would say that everybody would definitely say, if they asked me which one I was the most passionate about, they would know for sure that this is the one, because it's the human piece. Anyhow, that's all I have to say.
Thanks very much, Marla. Next up is Linda Manning, Senior Fellow, Center on Governance, University of Ottawa.
Thank you, Don. Yes, I'm Linda Manning. I'm at the University of Ottawa, and I too am an economist. Seems to be that's a good thing to be this morning. So that's great. And I have a little bit of a different twist to talk about this morning. Not, I think, like an economist, but what I'm going to talk about isn't exactly economics. I immigrated to Canada in 1999. And one of the things that first caught my eye about the economy of Canada was this big disconnect between the shortage of skills that everybody was projecting and the need for economic growth, and at the same time, all of these skilled immigrants coming in. And I remember myself, I looked at the point system. I didn't come in as an economic immigrant. My husband sponsored me, and he's Tunisian, so he loves for people to know that he sponsored me to be in Canada. He always tells people I married him for the Canadian. I immigrated from the U.S., so anyway, what I found was that much of the literature and the research literature and the media were focused on hiring, the issue of hiring immigrants. They're getting jobs, and secondarily, they're getting jobs in their fields, okay, at that time. I also saw a strong emphasis on the immigrant themselves, on fixing them, shaping them, changing them. So there was this presumably a round peg that immigrants didn't quite fit into, and if we could just fit them into that round peg, everything would be okay. But what I saw was even those who got jobs, there was some real limited success in their careers. there was a lot of turnover. A lot of people were either terminated by their employers or they left. Many of them, I mean, with startling frequency, leave Canada. They give up and leave Canada. And that, of course, from my economics perspective, said, wait a minute, not only is this doing harm to those immigrants who've struggled and come to Canada, but what about the business? What about the Canadian economy? There's a huge, huge cost here. So I was troubled by the focus on the immigrant all this time. So I looked at the companies that were getting awards at the time on their so-called inclusive practices that were successful. And when I see, and if you look at them, you probably see the same thing, the companies, the criteria that were used to determine whether or not a company got an award were all based on how effectively the company was helping the immigrant shape themselves and fit themselves into that peg. So that kind of troubled me. So being who I am, I said, okay, this is those aspects, those practices, those projects that people were engaged in, those are necessary, but they're not sufficient to actually achieve integration of immigrants into the Canadian economy. Employers have to adapt too. They are profit maximizing, profit optimizing individuals. They need to adjust what they do. So I had great luck in getting some money from HRSDC, and I embarked on a 3-year research and development project that what we wanted to do was identify workplace practices that may unintentionally be creating barriers for integration of immigrants in the workplace. And what we found is that the conflicts in the workplace are a function of cultural differences, which doesn't surprise anybody. But what we forget is that it's not just the culture of the immigrant, it's the culture of the Canadian that also is at play. And it's that contradiction or that conflict that creates a lot of the problems. And many of those conflicts are invisible. So our project actually had a substantial amount of research where we did qualitative work with focus groups, with immigrants, with employers, with HR professionals, with managers. And we came away with some very interesting results. I think that they're key. And from those results, we created an online learning game tool for managers to help them integrate immigrants into the workplace based on talent management practices. I'm going to grab it. So let me tell you about some of our findings. First of all, it's known that the manager is the key to retention, development, and advancement of any employee, regardless of whether they come from another country or another culture. And they and their employers must identify and own their own cultural orientation, their values, and their expectations, because these are the things that drive what the manager does in the workplace with their employees. It drives how they engage their employees, how they evaluate employee performance, and how they identify high potential or high performing employees, which is critical in a time when we're so worried about the aging population. We have retiring people. We don't have, heard yesterday, a huge gap in age in the North Bay area where there are a number of people there. There's emptiness where there should be people being prepared for those management and leadership positions. That's an incredible problem. So the manager's job is to engage, evaluate, and identify their employee performance. And that is called talent management, as I discovered. As an economist, I didn't know anything about that. So what we realized is that inclusive talent management practices will help to engage, effectively evaluate, and identify immigrant employees, but also all of your other employees, because as it turns out, these cultural dimensions, these cultural orientations that are sometimes different, come from not just what company, what country you come from, not just whether you're a man or a woman, not just what discipline is, what previous organization you work for. Imagine the young person graduating from university that comes from a university culture, walking into their first job in a corporation. Those are culture clashes every step of the way. And so we need to understand these things anyway. But the good manager, the best managers, adapt their practices to all of those things. So it's just a matter of understanding how to be inclusive to include immigrants and Aboriginals, women, the older workers, younger workers, and different ethnicities. The other, so that talent management practices was one of the big things that came out of the research and became part of this learning game that we developed. The second thing, though, was workplace networks. And it's an interesting thing that every time I hear anybody talk about integration of anybody into anything, networks comes up. The creation of social, professional, workplace networks comes up. And yet nobody pays much attention to it. It just seems to be kind of an underlying thing. But what we found is that workplace networks are essential to productivity in the workplace. For example, today, I want you to take note of the number of times that you meet somebody because you know somebody, right? Or you have something that you need to get done, you have a goal, even if it's a minor objective of finding out where lunch is. The networks that you have provide you with help to do those things, to meet your objectives. Well, imagine that you are in a, am I going on too long, by the way? I get very excited. Okay. I was intent to stay to my 5 minutes and I got excited. The networks affect productivity, and most employers are not concerned with how to make those connections work. And it's not just the immigrants' access to the Canadian networks, it's the Canadian access to the immigrant networks that are equally important. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Linda. Whoever thought we'd hear economists talking about talent management and networks and good social stuff like that. Next up is Carmen Demarco, who is returning to his roots in North Bay. He's from the well-known Demarco family in North Bay, now lives in Sudbury. Carmen is the program manager in Northern Ontario with FedNor.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I've got a couple of slides to show you in a few moments. I think I'm here because of, 30 years of experience in economic development in Northern Ontario, primarily Northeastern Ontario. But also, my parents were both immigrants from Italy. As mentioned, there's a store, 348 Algonquin Avenue. I promised my dad I'd give him a plug. Family established a store downtown North Bay. It's still there. 1927, it opened its doors, and it's still there. And it's a confectionery, and that's all kinds of interesting goods, and you can grab a good lunch there, and good company. Anyways, that doesn't count as 5 minutes. I do want to say that Denise Deschamps from our North Bay office is here, and she was instrumental in working with me and others at FedNor to get the funding to help support this conference, and we're very happy to be able to do so. There you go. The first set of slides is just more generic on our programming in Northern Ontario. I'm going to go through these very quickly. Everything that you see in this first set of slides can be found on our website. It's just been refurbished, and we've just reestablished our priorities recently as well. So I'll get you to flip forward then, please. Just a little bit about Government of Canada, certainly committed to economic development in Northern Ontario. We have a program called the Northern Ontario Development Program, which these slides speak to. And again, strengthen local economic development, enhance business growth, and facilitate innovation. And those are our three priority areas again. Economic development, which is really the piece that we're able to support this conference. Business growth and competitiveness and innovation. Economic development, we're committed to working with industry stakeholders to build strong and sustainable communities in Northern Ontario. And we do this by planning and mobilizing the resources, enhancing business growth, exploit new opportunities in economic development and diversification. And just look at some of the expected results that we hope to gain from this particular initiative. I'll let you read those. All right, and the next one, business growth and competitiveness. Are committed to fostering economic growth, increase competitiveness in business in Northern Ontario, done through improving productivity, reaching out to new markets, facilitate access to capital, and encourage entrepreneurship. And the final, expected results again in that area. Competitiveness, export performance, and so on. And finally, innovation, our third pillar, if you will, and committed to supporting communities and businesses, innovative, productive, competitive areas. So certainly you'll see business and community repeated over and over again. And that's an acknowledgement that, hand in hand, communities need to work on economic development and, of course, encourage business growth. That in turn, of course, creates jobs and prosperity. Community Futures Program, I've got more slides on that, but that's another key initiative. In Northern Ontario, we have 24 of these organizations, and they're focusing on local development. Each of them has the following core services: access to capital, business support services, strategic economic development, and we'll talk more about that, and community economic development. And another program we have is the EDI program, Economic Development Initiative, and that specifically deals with Francophone initiatives across Northern Ontario. And we have a number of projects in that area. And Denise is one of the officers that coordinates that project for us. And here's how to find us if you want to learn more about all of those programs. Okay, on to Community Futures, which I think is a topic that I was asked to speak to. And it's an interesting program. It's been around for over 20 years. National program right across Canada. So it survived numerous governments, which is kind of interesting. It doesn't always happen. And its initial, I guess the intent originally was, government had this wild idea that maybe we should consult with communities and empower communities around their future. And therein is the name Community Futures. So in Northern Ontario, 24 of these organizations were set up back in the 80s. Each of them has their own board of directors. They're incorporated on their own. In North Bay, there is, which is called NICO. It's been established here for, I think, probably close to the 20 years that the program's been around. So the idea was pull together stakeholders from the community, business interests, education interests, Francophone, First Nations, education, training, human resources, pull them together on a committee and give them some resources, some financial resources, human resources, to make decisions about the future of their areas. Now, most of these organizations are clusters of communities.